migration crisis amid finger-pointing between EU countries and Budapest. Hundreds of migrants protest at Central Railway for a second day, while in Greece, some 4,000 people arrive on shores. A major victory for U.S. President Barack Obama. Democrat Barbara Mikulski becomes the 34th senator to announce support for the Iran nuclear deal, helping assure the Republican-led effort to block it will fail. And our correspondent travels to the front lines of Kurdistan to bring us an exclusive look at the controversial CYCI organization working to rescue Yazidi girls and women from the clutches of the Islamic State.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Welcome to the news today. Hundreds of migrants protested for a second day in Budapest against Hungary's decision to prevent them from continuing their journey to Germany and other EU countries. Italy, France, and Germany have signed a joint document calling for fair distribution of migrants in Europe, but divisions over how to deal with the crisis are high. Ayman Siksik has the details.
A pioneering new plan by the European Union Commission could dramatically alter migration laws and provide refuge for asylum seekers arriving in Europe. The EU Commission is drafting a proposal to change a rule that demands migrants request asylum in the country they first arrive in. This has been one of the most contentious issues in Europe's migration crisis, as many of those disembarking in Greece, Hungary, or Italy arrive in hopes of migrating internally to other countries within Europe. But at the moment, a solution seems less than tangible, with the European governments split over how to deal with the enormous challenge, and with states increasingly blaming each other.
We have a system in Europe which no longer works, and Hungary is making this very clear. The asylum seekers all want to come to Germany. When you ask them where they want to go, their only response is Germany or Munich.
Germany is an attractive destination for good reason. The country has already begun accepting asylum claims from Syrian refugees, regardless of where they entered the EU. But the policy has attracted frustration in neighboring Bavaria and Hungary, where hundreds of refugees from Syria were denied access to trains bound for Germany and protested for a second day today. Hungary has accused Germany of escalating the migrant crisis through problematic laws.
It has been proven that some European leaders act contrary to European values and interests as far as handling of the challenges of migrations are concerned. It became clear that policy based on mandatory quota has failed because it just encourages the human traffickers and immigrants to come to Europe.
Meanwhile, the influx of migrants is showing no signs of subsiding. Wednesday saw 11 Syrian migrants drown heading to the Greek islands. In the past month, about 2,000 people a day have been making their way to Greece. And on the coast of Italy, dozens more arrived today after a few days on the Mediterranean. Not all of them survived the trip. The European Union will hold an extraordinary meeting to discuss the matter in Brussels on September 14th. Meanwhile, those fleeing war and persecution in the Middle East and Africa are arriving in a continent riddled with division.
And also on the migrant crisis, Czech police removed about 200 migrants from trains heading towards Germany and marked them with numbers. The migrants had arrived from Budapest in Hungary and were placed in detention centers after being removed from the train in the eastern province of Moravia. According to police, most of the migrants had come from Syria. The governor of southern Moravia, where the train was stopped, said that authorities in the region are preparing for what would occur in the wave of migrants increased. And to understand a little bit more about what is happening right now, Daniel Sheikh, former Israeli ambassador to France. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening, Lucy.
You know, I'm reading this, tagging people with numbers, putting them in detention centers. It's too much. It reminds me of a really, really bad time that the world experienced. And did we learn anything from our past, or maybe the past is coming back again, and we're not able to handle it.
The last time, the time that you're referring to, the Germans created the refugees, and now they're receiving them, rescuing them. But the problem is much larger than that. It's not the question of a few hundred people who nobody knows how to handle. The question is, can Europe handle a huge influx of refugees? Does it have the capacity to do it? Does it have the willingness to do it? And is this about to become maybe the greatest challenge to Europe and to Western civilization in the first half of the 21st century? This could be the case.
So, you know, I'm trying to understand if this new, let's say, deal or a new plan that Europe is trying to come up with is actually going to work when it's something that it feels that it was come up with, like, for 48 hours. They needed to find a plan, and they found it, and they put it on the table.
There's the question of the refugees from the Syrian war, which is a relatively localized problem. You can estimate the size of the problem, and maybe you can also find the proper solutions. But behind that, there is also a constant flux of people who are not refugees, of migrants coming from Africa, coming from poor countries, who for economic reasons, for quality of life, are fed up with the way they are treated in their home countries, the miserable living conditions, and they just want a better life.
You know, as a former diplomat, you wouldn't come up with a plan to say, like, you wouldn't go and tell them, like, you're sitting together, and you won't say, guys, listen, we should not start taking care of the problems when it's in our doors. Maybe we should start taking care of the problems and really look for a solution in these countries, in Syria, in Iraq.
Only this is a discussion that should have taken place 30 years ago.
Exactly.
So that's the problem. But it still doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it now. You're absolutely right. We're talking about countries that are prosperous, not entirely, but in part, because they took advantage of poor countries for centuries. They exploited them for centuries. And it created huge gaps between the rich first developed world and the third, or some call it the fourth world today. The thing is that with globalization and with free information, people in the poor countries know for a fact that they can have a better life elsewhere. They can see it on television. They can call their friends on their cell phones who are already living there. And therefore, they are coming in masses.
Yeah, but when they're coming in masses, the question is if the situation will be better in Syria. Like, for example, just 5 years ago, the situation was better in Syria. Will all these people come back, get back to Syria at the end?
I suspect not. I mean, classically, refugees who flee a difficult life, once they settle in a better place and where they are welcome. And we don't know that they will always be welcome, but that's still to be seen. For the moment, I think Germany and most of Europe are very welcoming. Although we can talk, if you want, about the possible political repercussions, what this is going to do, radical right-wing parties, etc., etc. But for the moment, they're very welcome. And there's hardly a reason for them to want to go back. Not all of them. There are people who have families, who have careers, who are patriots, who want to go back. But first of all, it doesn't look like the war in Syria is about to end. And even if it does, I think that these people are there to stay.
Yeah, only if Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these places will become Switzerland one day, and it's not looking like
it's not around the corner.
Yeah, it's not around the corner. Daniel Check, thank you very, very much for this. The magic number is 34. That's the number of senators President Obama needs to support the Iran deal to ensure that even if Congress does reject the agreement and he uses his veto can't be overridden. Elio Homburg sums up what and where it all stands now.
It's done. U.S. President Barack Obama can breathe a deep sigh of relief. Senator Barbara Mikulski announced Wednesday she would support the nuclear deal with Iran, sealing a victory for President Obama. Mikulski is the 34th senator to announce her endorsement, giving Congress the ability to sustain a presidential veto of the Republican-led resolution of disapproval aimed at killing the deal. Supporters of the deal are now aiming to get an even higher number of votes, 41, which would block the resolution from passing in the first place and spare Obama from having to use his veto power. On the same day, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry sent a letter to all members of Congress outlining Washington's security commitments to Israel and the Gulf Arab states in light of their discontent with the nuclear agreement. He also continues to publicly advocate the deal he was instrumental in forging.
We were well aware that every proposal, every provision, every detail would have to withstand the most painstaking scrutiny. We knew that. And so we made clear from the outset that we would not settle for anything less than an agreement that was comprehensive, verifiable, effective, and of lasting duration.
Kerry's partner drafting the accord, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, is also closely following the developments in Washington.
We believe it's a mutually beneficial agreement, and if people are not too much concerned with the propaganda being waged by warmongers in our region and outside our region, there is no reason for the deal to face any impediments in the United States.
Yet the opinions within the Islamic Republic are still very much divided. The chief of Tehran's top clerical committee stated once again Tuesday that the United States remains Iran's #1 enemy.
We have to be aware that the nuclear agreement won't change the foreign policy of the country. The Islamic Republic of Iran recognized the United States as its first enemy. The crimes that were and will be committed by the United States are innumerable.
The Assembly of Experts, led by the ultra-conservative Ayatollah Muhammad Yazdi, is among Iran's most influential institutions and is only a part of the harsh opposition to the nuclear deal among Iranians.
And with me right now is diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, Ali Ochenberg. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, what the fuss was all about?
I think it will take us some time to digest everything, but as for now, it's over. The White House needed only one chamber to sustain the veto, and this is what was achieved. So, even if Congress passes the resolution of disapproval later on this month, Obama will veto the resolution, and the 34th senator that announced its support today means that there will not be enough votes to override this veto, but the Democrats, as said, are not resting yet. They still want to get 41 votes in favor of the deal. So this entire process of the presidential veto will be completely unnecessary. But I think that just maybe, the festive headlines are a bit overdoing it, because at the end of the day, Obama is somewhat forcing the deal with harsh opposition of Republicans in Congress, bipartisan objection, and polls that indicate that between 30 to 50% of the American public are supporting the deal, or the other way around, between 50 to 70% of them oppose the deal. So yes, maybe a foreign policy win, and also just maybe because the results will be known in years from now, but not a great success with the public.
So let's look at the, let's say, big picture. Let's take it another step. And in a case that in 1 year, the Republicans will rule the White House, what will happen then? Big troubles for Iran, big trouble for the entire world.
For the entire world and the entire situation, because as for now, yes, as said, this the deal is reassured, but its long-term viability is definitely not, because almost every single one of the Republican presidential candidates says that the first thing they will do if they will win office is to cancel the Iran deal, and it still remains one of the hottest topics in America, a very disputed topic, and also in Iran itself. And during the negotiations, one of the major issues was the snapback of sanctions if Iran violates the deal. But maybe we will face a situation in which the U.S. will want to violate the deal and cancel it, and that will be a whole different ball game.
Let's talk a little bit about Iran making some not so peaceful headlines towards the Zionist regime, or we're not against Jews, but we are against Israel. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Iran aims at increasing its regional influence, and by that it also means tackling the Palestinian issue. And they, several Iranian officials stated that it's not that they're anti-Semitic or anything, but they just really object to the Zionist regime and Israel, and they still show no softened approach when it comes to Israel and its legitimacy. And it will be very interesting to see what the Europeans and the Americans will do about this issue, because again, they're not softening their approach whatsoever at the moment.
And this is bread to Benjamin Netanyahu, of course. It's just like, yeah.
He's enjoying tonight. Yeah.
Of course he's enjoying. He's always enjoying. Ali Ochenberg, thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Lucy.
And the old saying goes that politics makes for strange bedfellows. Well, so does war, as a plan by U.S. General David Petraeus shows that the general's idea could see Al-Qaeda fighting alongside U.S. troops to defeat the greater enemy, the Islamic State. Shai Ben-Ari tries to explain the story.
The problem of coping with the threat of the Islamic State terrorist group continues to perplex some of the greatest military minds in the West. But one unique suggestion has now been put forward by one of America's most experienced generals. David Petraeus, the former CIA chief and head of Central Command, believes the U.S. should try to split the ranks of the al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front and use its, quote, reconcilable elements against IS. Petraeus made the comments in a statement to CNN, reacting to a story on the Daily Beast website. Islamic militants today dominate the rebel forces fighting the Assad regime in Syria, and indeed al-Nusra includes many different elements, not all of whom necessarily buy in to the group's official Sunni jihadist ideology. The anti-IS coalition has meanwhile struggled to put together a competent ground force capable of meeting the challenge of IS, with only Kurdish troops scoring some successes against the Islamic State. An attempt to train moderate rebels has fallen short of expectations, precisely because of the U.S.'s strict vetting process for potential partners on the battlefield.
As of July 3rd, we are currently training about 60 fighters. This number is much smaller than we'd hoped for at this point.
I got to tell you, after 4 years, Mr. Secretary, that's not a very impressive number.
The notion of collaboration between Washington and a group tied to al-Qaeda may appear shocking at first, but if anyone has the clout to suggest it, it is Petraeus, whose experience in modern-day battlefield command is unrivaled in the U.S. His term at the head of the CIA was cut short by personal controversy, but the four-star general also served as commander of Allied forces in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Petraeus is credited with designing and implementing the strategy that eventually defeated the Iraqi insurgency of the previous decade. Much of that counterinsurgency strategy rested on persuading Iraqi Sunni militias to switch sides and join the U.S. fight against al-Qaeda in Iraq, the group that would later morph into IS. Petraeus now supports a similar plan in Syria. Still, rallying elements of al-Nusra against IS is easier said than done. Nusra militants are generally focused on the fight against the Assad regime. There have even been cases of cooperation in this respect between it and the Islamic State. It appears there is still a long way to go before an enemy of an enemy becomes a friend.
Enemies and enemy becomes a friend. Military correspondent Shai Ben-Ari is going to try to explain to me, Shai, it's like from we got him to, oh, we are going totally to cooperate with them.
Yes, in a sense, people have come a long way, let's put it that way. It's certainly a radical idea. It would be very difficult for the U.S. to implement this on many levels. First of all, even if there are a select few number of fighters who could possibly get on board with this idea, how do you contact them? How do you persuade them?
What, you, like, invite them for dinner?
It's not like they're in the phone book, you know?
Exactly.
How do you control them? The administration, with any sort of issue that even remotely is similar, has been very wary of any sort of compromise on this issue. It's mentioned in the piece. The U.S. has a very strict vetting process. They rule out any sort of a person with any sort of ties to the Islamic groups. Let's say if the administration were to choose to go down that road, there are other groups perhaps better suited than the al-Nusra Front, which has ties to al-Qaeda. For example, al-Sham is one of the biggest rebel groups in Syria. It is also Islamic jihadist. It is arguably more moderate than al-Qaeda, than IS, of course. It supports the establishment of an Islamic State, but it says it acknowledges the need to take into consideration the views of the people. Sounds all right.
Which is very fair. Yeah.
It was even involved in the rescue of a group of 4 NBC journalists who were kidnapped by a criminal group, including Richard Engel. It's interesting to point out the similarity, or it just brings to mind the claims of Druze residents in the Golan, basically who are convinced that Israel is collaborating with the Nusra Front on the other side. Whether that's the case, it appears to not be the case.
Hezbollah, of course.
Right, of course. The Israeli military has maintained that there is no collaboration. It has admitted to certain cases of medical aid. That's still very far from what we're talking about here.
But what do we know? Shaiv and Arif, of course. What do we know? But yeah, it's like it can be, maybe they can text them if I'm going back to how they can contact them. Shaiv and Arif, thank you very much for this.
No problem.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is on a 3-nation tour of the Far East. Today he's in Beijing, where he seeks to expand Cairo's ties beyond its traditional alliance with the West. I-24 News correspondent Charles Bilzer looks at what's behind the Egyptian leader's Eastern approach.
Egypt is veering eastward. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was received with open arms in Beijing Wednesday, his second visit to China since assuming office in 2014. Sisi held talks with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, which were followed by the signing of a series of bilateral agreements. The Egyptian leader is set to attend a massive military parade on Thursday to mark the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. Most Western leaders are staying away, though, perhaps viewing it as a provocation as Beijing ups its militaristic rhetoric and territorial expansion in the South China Sea. The visit comes 1 week after Sisi's third trip to Moscow. The former Cold War allies have experienced a rapprochement amid strains between Cairo and Washington. After the U.S. temporarily cut off military aid to Egypt following the removal of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, Sisi quickly moved to sign arms deals with Russia to the tune of billions of dollars.
One of the largest projects is the construction in Egypt of a nuclear power plant based on Russian technologies.
Cairo is equally driven by a desire to enhance trade with Eastern powers, since its economy is still reeling from political turmoil caused by the Arab Spring. The situation has become dire, with a growing Islamist insurgency threatening to decimate Egypt's vital tourism industry. As the East-West divide intensifies over issues ranging from the conflicts in Syria and Ukraine to human rights, Egypt is likely to find itself playing a delicate balancing game. Although for now, the scale appears tilting to one side.
And now we're going to the Gaza Strip, which, according to a United Nations report, may be uninhabitable within 5 years. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development said the economic blockade of the Strip, together with the 3 Israeli military operations there in the past 8 years, have destroyed the enclave's economy, and its inhabitants are significantly worse off than they were 20 years ago, with per capita gross domestic product down by 30%. And with me right now here is Senior Middle East analyst Ali Waked. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. And you're bringing something new that actually connected to the migrant crisis all over the world, but it's actually happening on the border of Israel.
Yeah, for the first time in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in the Gaza Strip, an hour and a half ago, a Palestinian family from the region of Farahin in the city of Khan Yunis at the south of the Gaza Strip raised white clothes, kind of white flags, and reached the Israeli-Palestinian borders in the Gaza Strip and demanded the right of asylum to Israel. The Israeli soldiers took the family, investigated with them, and we are hearing that the Israelis are now bringing them back back to the Gaza Strip, and it might be maybe the first sign in a wave maybe of migrants flew from the Gaza Strip to the borders, especially when we are hearing what the Egyptian Authority are digging in between Palestinian Rafah and Egyptian Rafah in order to prevent the Hamas tunnels and the smuggling of weapons.
Can we understand why Israel maybe is trying to stop this? Because instead of creating a wave like what is happening right now in Europe, they are trying to stop this because Israel might find itself like with all the Gaza Strip inhabitants.
Absolutely. I talked to a member of the family that tried to run away from the Gaza Strip this evening, and he said that the father of the family is not working. He has 6 or 7 kids that he must feed. That the school of the kids was destroyed in the war. Their houses were destroyed. Lucy, you were talking about the UN report. Did you know that in some schools of the UNRWA, there are right now classes that are hosting 70 students in one class, and there is one school with 88 pupils in the school because some of the schools were destroyed. Some of the schools are still occupied by family who lost their houses, and this is really inhabitable. The people cannot live in the Gaza Strip. When the Palestinians are I don't want to say fortunately for the Palestinians, they are seeing the people dying in the sea because many Palestinians think, and some of them do leave the Gaza Strip via the sea, with the risk, of course, to be shot by the Israeli army and maybe by the Egyptian Navy.
Ali, explain to me, please, because we know that a lot of money is getting into the Gaza Strip. We know that a lot of trucks and humanitarian help is getting into the Gaza Strip. How come the money and the humanitarian help actually is not getting to the people?
What I heard from the Palestinian Authority this evening is that only 14% of the donations that were supposed, the contributions that were supposed to be invested in the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip reached the Gaza Strip, and some projects of reconstruction, yes, did take place, but the very big majority of this money did not reach the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip, there are 2 million of Palestinians. Most of them are unemployed. Most of them, many of them, tens of thousands of them lost their houses. Schools do not exist. Factories and companies are not operating in the Gaza Strip. And these trucks that go inside are only seizing the day-to-day elementary and basic needs of the population, and far from being enough to develop the population.
Yes, Ali Waqid, thank you very, very much for this. And we're going out for a 2-minute break, and still coming up on the news today, an exclusive look inside Iraqi Kurdistan at a controversial organization paying the Islamic State terror group to release female captives. Don't go anywhere, 2 minutes, and I'll be back. Europe's migration crisis amid finger-pointing between EU countries. In Budapest, hundreds of migrants protest at a central railway for a second day, while in Greece, some 4,000 people arrive in shores. A major victory for U.S. President Barack Obama. Democrat Barbara Mikulski becomes the 34th senator to announce support for the Iran nuclear deal, helping assure the Republican-led effort to block it will fail. And our correspondent travels to the front lines of Kurdistan to bring us an exclusive look at the controversial CYCI organization working to rescue Yazidi girls and women from the clutches of the Islamic State. Welcome back to the news today. Ahmed Zghairi suffers from a rare genetic disorder. He lives in a village in East Jerusalem, but his school is in the western part of the city. And he needs a special permit to get there, which only adds to his daily struggle. I-24 News correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim brings us the story.
This is 15-year-old Ahmed Zghairi from Abu Dis village near Jerusalem. Ahmed is deaf, and he suffers from Usher syndrome, a rare genetic disorder and the leading cause of deaf blindness. He can't see in one eye and can see only 20% in his other eye. It's incurable. Ahmed carries a green Palestinian identity card, which makes it illegal for him to enter Jerusalem without a permit.
Every something like 3 months, we are in contact with the civil administration, and we write a special letter in order for them to give him permit to go in.
Permits to enter Jerusalem are issued to Ahmed's parents too, so they can accompany him. Their day starts at 5:30 every morning, so he can make it to the Zaytuna checkpoint in time to catch the bus to school.
At that time, it's dark, and when it's dark, he doesn't see anything. He's completely blind.
A special lane at the checkpoint is dedicated to people with cases like Ahmed, and for teachers, doctors, and people over the age of 60. But despite that, he still faces a tough time at the checkpoint, sometimes causing him to miss school.
It depends on the checkpoint. Sometimes I'm late for school because there is lots of people and it's chaotic. I try to bypass them, but I get caught. I get sad, I must be patient. Always police, always long lines, and the army tells me to get back in the line.
He says the army doesn't believe that he is only 15 years old because his body is big for his age. Ahmed studies at the Kol Yisrael Havarim School in Jerusalem, a name that means we are all friends in Israel. Its goal to bring understanding and acceptance of differences into otherwise separated Jewish and Arab communities. Ahmed's teacher, Hind Salman, says that outside of school, he doesn't get the chance to socialize with kids like him.
One of the difficulties that faces Ahmed is that he lives in the West Bank, but goes to school in Jerusalem. He feels different.
The school provides Ahmed with a chance to learn and to simply be in a positive environment. And there is no school like it close to his home in the West Bank.
He likes friends, he likes to communicate, he likes the deaf community, which is very, very strong here. So for him, coming to the school is breathing oxygen.
The school provides Ahmed with an outlet to express himself. He loves drawing and working out.
I love to be a physical trainer in the future.
For Ahmed, the school is a source of hope, an opportunity to learn, to boost his self-esteem in the hope of a successful and happy future.
With me right now is correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for bringing us this beautiful story. Beautiful, because
heartwarming story.
It's a heartwarming story because you know, usually we're talking about the difficulties and the tension between Arabs and Jews, and here we're seeing a deaf, almost blind kid going to a school from the West Bank, going to a school in Jerusalem, and speaking the sign language, the
alphabets, if we can say that.
Yes, if we can say.
It's in Hebrew, it's in also in Arabic.
And it's different.
It's different, of course, and that's why in the school they have separate classes for Jewish students and for Arabic or Arab students, so they can learn each other's sign languages, alphabets.
So when they're talking to one another, they're talking either in the Hebrew sign language or in the Arabic sign language?
That's right, and I guess there is also a common sign language for both of them. I saw yesterday when we were there, the students communicate among each other, and it was really, really pleasant to see that there is no wall between them. Now, let's talk about Ahmed and his family. Ahmed isn't the first member of his family that has this disease. His older brother Ali has this disease, and he actually studied in this school in 1995. So his family are very familiar with the school. Ahmed went through, Ali went through it, and now Ahmed is going through the same program at the school.
So if the two brothers were already, why there's so much difficulties with the permits and everything, and not just giving them?
Well, Ahmed's family live in Abu Dis, a village just outside of Jerusalem. And he's not a Jerusalem ID card holder. He's actually from the West Bank, from a village near Ramallah, so he holds a Palestinian ID. The Israeli civil administration study each case that is brought to them case by case, and they looked at Ahmed's family's case, and they gave them a permit for him, his brother, as well as his parents, so they can accompany him each day to the bus and back.
And with all the complications, he is going to school where he finds his Jewish friends, and he actually communicates with them. Maybe the silent world sometimes is better than the world when we listen to some people. Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you very much for this.
My pleasure.
The Catholic Church begins a year of mercy this December, and Pope Francis shook the world yesterday when he said that once it begins, priests around the world can forgive the sin of abortion. But this latest pronouncement from the pontiff has not been universally welcomed, as Or Shapira explains.
A day after Pope Francis shook the world with a controversial statement allowing priests to forgive women who have had abortions, the announcement is receiving mixed reactions in the Catholic world, and especially in Latin America, home to around 40% of the world's Catholics, and not only Pope Francis's home continent, but also a bastion of ultra-conservative Catholic belief.
I say that there is no forgiveness from God for this, and I think it is something that is not correct. As a woman, I say that a child is the most sacred.
It needs to be said that not all women who have an abortion feel it's a tragedy like the Pope says. For many, it's a solution to a great personal crisis of pregnancy when they're not in a position to continue through with maternity.
The decision taken by Pope Francis does not change the policy of the Church and applies only to the Year of Mercy, which begins on December 8 and runs through November 20, 2016. However, some priests say that this policy is already being implemented in churches and there is no need for a special gesture by the Pope.
If she's been to a priest, if they've received absolution for this from a priest, they're forgiven. Just no question about it. They are forgiven, and God, we might say, has forgotten, okay? And they can put it behind them.
Others, however, think this move, even if symbolic, can give final approval for those who want to take this tough decision but are afraid of being excluded from their society.
This is an effort by the leader of the hierarchy, the Pope, to actually embrace a different way of talking about abortion.
Pope Francis is considered one of the most liberal and progressive leaders of the Catholic world. But will the Holy See continue to maintain its spirit and tradition after his reforms? God only knows.
Finally, somebody who's trying to make a change in a lot of important things. And right now with me is Dr. Alex Coleman, value creation expert at the Academic College of Tel Aviv. Yafo, good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. So let's talk about Bloomberg and not such good news.
Right. Well, Bloomberg has been making a lot of money and has been growing dramatically against Reuters, which was its competitor. So Thomson Reuters used to be the large player. They had 38% of the market. Bloomberg basically Michael started the company for $10 million that they received. And now Bloomberg has something like 32% of the market and is leading massively.
So why to lay off?
Well, it's an interesting question. There are two answers. One answer is what we call creative destruction, which means that once a company grows, it becomes insensitive to the environment. It becomes like a sleepy dinosaur, if you wish, and then it dies. For instance, Bloomberg bought Businessweek. Businessweek used to be a formidable financial newspaper, and they bought it for nothing. It's worth nothing, actually. So one thing is that by firing people, there's this experiment with mice in a maze. If they have no food, then they are just hysterical. They do not find the food. If they are fed, of course, they do not. So the right thing is to have people, to have mice at the just right level of hunger.
People, potato, it's
potato, mice. The same thing.
The same thing, but different.
You cannot tell them apart. So I figured that by laying off 80 people, they are going to save some money, spread what somebody called the climate of fear in the company, and I think they want to spend more money on being available on mobile. Mobile is really the big thing, and if you go into Bloomberg, you see that they're not really mobile friendly.
So how actually they're going to make people, when they're firing 80 people, how they're going to make people in their company actually want to produce something else when the people in the company knows that this company is making more money or getting bigger influence?
Well, you're going under the assumption that if you're nice to people, they will be nice at you. And I think that much in America believes that if you spread a climate of fear, people will be even nicer because they will sweat.
The regular, again, you're smashing everything in my life. Bank Leumi Bank in Israel.
Well, Bank Leumi, like all Israeli banks, to be honest, has been involved in laundering money. Not like Israeli, like all banks. they helped people launder money. Laundering money actually started with drugs. That's not the case with Bank Leumi. But the point is that the U.S. failed miserably at blocking drugs. And then they realized that they cannot block the drugs, but they can prevent the people who make tons of money use it.
But isn't money laundering is illegal?
Oh, absolutely. For that reason, the bank is supposed... I mean, if you bring a huge amount of cash to the bank, they should report you. If you transfer money suspiciously, they should report you, etc. Which means that it's very lucrative to banks if they do not report you. It's very nice for you if you have illegal money. So actually, Bank Leumi, like all banks, did it, particularly since the U.S. started a crackdown on Swiss banks. So Galia Maor, she received $30 million in bonuses, and Eitan Raf, $9 million, so it's a large amount.
Oh, my God.
Yes, and now the bank paid $400 million in penalty. So basically what the head of the banking system in Israel is saying, you got these bonuses. Part of the bonuses are because illegal business that you brought in, bring the business bonuses back.
Now I understand why the bankers, when I'm going to Leumi Bank, are a little bit angry.
Yes, because
no, I understand that. Okay, Alex Coleman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. The CYCI is an organization working to free Christian and Yazidi women and children from Islamic State sexual slavery. It was founded by Steve Maman, a Canadian Jewish businessman being called the Jewish Schindler, and has so far rescued around 130 girls and women from the clutches of the IS. I-24 News correspondent Mael Ben-Uriel traveled to Kurdistan and spent time with a CYCI team, and they continue their controversial mission.
These are the Yazidi leaders of the Sinjar region, located in northeastern Iraqi Kurdistan. All of them are here. That is, most all of them. Nearly 1 year ago to the day, Islamic State jihadists launched an offensive in this very place. They defeated Kurdish forces and captured this mountainous area, the historical birthplace of the Yazidi people.
IS started attacking us on August 3rd, 2014. I didn't want to believe it, and in my mind I never thought about fleeing. I will stay, even if it means dying, because of it. I will stand side by side with my people, and I will keep on fighting.
The lost battle motivated the international community to intervene against IS, which evolved into a US-led coalition that continues to conduct airstrikes against the terror group. But the harm had already been done. Hundreds of Yazidis were massacred and more than 7,000 others were taken prisoner. The men were forced to convert to Islam or face execution. The women forced into sexual slavery. This mother of 2 young children is one of them. For months, she endured abuses by IS jihadists. We met her in the Kabarto refugee camp, only a few kilometers from Mosul in northern Iraq. The 23-year-old woman told us of the ordeal she went through.
I was sold to 3 different men during this time period. I was forced to marry one of them. With the other 2, I was a sex slave. As they were raping me, they would beat up my children. After that, I got sick, so they decided to sell me back to my family.
This is how her nightmare ended. Her family received the necessary money from an organization that works to free Christian and Yazidi women and children held hostage by the IS in Iraq. The CYCI was founded by Steve Maman, a Canadian originally from Morocco. He's already being called the Jewish Schindler. Svian is part of the CYCI team, joining only a few days ago. A Kurdish Yazidi, he was there when the young woman and her 2 children were freed.
We don't give the money if we are not see the family, if the family be relaxed. We go with the family in the different border, like Turkish border, Syria border. Sometimes we go to be near to the Mosul with them family. because by the condition for the CYCI, we can't give the money if we are not with them, because we need to be sure. Of course, they kidnap it. We are take 1 minute, about 2 minutes, like a video on the same picture. That is be like a document. Steve, that is kidnapped.
My daughter back.
The CYCI says it has saved 130 people, a number that has been questioned by some who consider the organization illegitimate, arguing it unintentionally finances terrorism. But that likely does not matter to all these ransomed women and children. For them, freedom is priceless.
Yes, and earlier this evening we spoke to Steve Maman, the man behind this controversial effort to pay for the release of children from IS. Let's see what he had to say. And with us from Montreal is Steve Maman, founder of the Liberation of Christian and Yazidi Children of Iraq, or the CYCI. Good evening. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Maman.
Yes, good evening, Lucy. How are you today?
All good. Mr. Maman, just try to explain to me from where came this idea of saving these people and why?
The idea where? I mean, you're asking from Israel, it should be easy to understand. We are a people that actually survived the Holocaust. We were, there's a very special occurrence in that Holocaust where Oskar Schindler, my hero, basically, I mean, he's one of the righteous of humankind. I mean, he had the Yad Vashem. I mean, you could only be in admiration in front of somebody like that. He's an example to the world, to all religions, to the point where we can learn through him that there's no race, no borders, and no religion. And I learned from a man like that.
You know, I'm trying to think, from where did you start? What was your starting point with creating this liberation of Christian and Yazidi children?
The starting point was that I befriended somebody in Iraq. We became very close. He was a very, very important person as far as security, prevention of terrorism, and hostage negotiation. He was Christian Assyrian. His name is Dawood. We became extremely, extremely close. And I actually realized that through him, I could make a difference helping people, because he had the requirements in order to be able to make a difference on the ground as far as contacts in the government, the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan government, contacts all the way to the president's office, to the prime minister's office, to the intelligence department, so to numerous ministers. So I actually used all of his credentials there and my friendship with him and my business, I guess, sense to actually tell them we should act, and I'll get the funding and you get the team on the ground. And that's how it worked. It worked out perfectly.
Steve, you weren't afraid in one point. You know, we're talking about really evil people. We're talking about people that, you know, might find you and say, who is he to come and intervene and save these people that we are trying to make them escape, or we are trying to hurt? You weren't afraid in one of the, like, in the process?
Not at all. I will tell you something. There's a famous phrase in Hebrew that says, even if you go to the dark, you know, the depth of the darkness, don't be scared, because he is with you. I will tell you that I go by this. This is what my life goes by. If you have the belief, if you have the trust in God that what you're doing is for the glory of God, it's a mitzvah, it's a good action. If you believe in what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, you can fix this world through acts of goodness and of kindness. Then at some point, I think that if you are assisted from above. It gives you a strength to act. You are presented with people in this world that actually give you examples of what you could follow. The question is, at the end of the day, do you want to be a spectator, or do you want to act? So far, I think I've shown the world that I will act. That's it.
Steve, so what is your answer to people who are saying that you are financing terror?
Okay. First of all, the world, puts fuel into their car that come from the Middle East. If fuel is not giving money back to terrorists through those countries that fund terrorism, then putting fuel becomes as worse than what I'm doing, actually. But let's talk about me now. Forget about what the people are doing. I myself do not deal with ISIS, do not fund ISIS, do not contact ISIS. They do not contact me. Our people on the ground, our CYCI team on the ground has incredible contacts on the inside of the caliphate. They're moderate Muslims, and these people are actually negotiating the release of these innocents. There is no payments to ISIS. There is no negotiations with the ISIS entity. This is pure hearsay. It's pure invention. It was invented by the Vice News report, which has no credentials at all.
Okay, just one more question before we're finishing. Did you think that one day you will be called the Schindler Jew?
No, I think the first or second report that came out, I think the journalist tried to get his article to take off, let alone he didn't imagine that it would create an 800,000 Google score in 3 weeks. I never allowed it. By the time I found out about it, it was too late to retract. It had already been shared by 10 or 15,000 other, elements on Google. It was too late. I couldn't stop it. But definitely, I have nothing to do with Schindler. He's on another planet. I mean, Schindler was working underneath the nose of the Nazis. He was working literally in the town of the Nazis. I'm working in Canada with air conditioning in my office. How could people compare me to Oscar Schindler? I mean, it is not. We are not on the same level at all.
Steve Maman, thank you very, very much for this interview, and thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you.
After we thanked Maman, there has been a lot of controversy over what Maman is doing. With the accusation, he has no evidence of his rescues. Maman has said he's working with Canon Andrew White. White's group released this statement on Tuesday. Steve Maman is a personal contact of Canon Andrew White, who has expressed support for the aims and objectives of CYCI. However, FRRME does not collaborate with CYCI either financially or in terms of practical assistance. To date, no material support has been given to CYCI by FRRME, nor is there any intention to provide material support in the future. And with me right now, somebody who was there, correspondent Mael Bouluriel. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, first of all, we've been talking a lot about Iraq. We've been talking a lot how dangerous the situation is, how easy it is to get into Iraq these days.
Well, Lucy, as you probably know, there is no direct line from Tel Aviv to Republic of Iraq and Erbil in particular. But as journalists, we found our way. And so the only thing that I can tell you, it took us only a few hours to get there. Okay? So, yeah, of course, it was my first time. It was not simple to be in this completely different world, as a Jewish, Israeli, French reporter that I am. But yeah, I did feel good, okay, and safe, mostly.
How did you feel safe? Because what we are seeing on the screens is a lot of chaos, a lot of mess. People are being massacred on the streets, and this is what we are putting out there. But you're saying that the situation is completely different in some places.
In some places, no, but we had some scary moments, okay? Yeah, that's for sure. But when you are like, let's say, in a place like Erbil, which is a big city, or Duhok, which is also a big city, you can feel pretty safe. Of course, you won't trust anybody, you won't follow anybody that you don't know, that's for sure. But when you, let's say, going to the front lines, okay, and getting closer to the front lines, so yeah, you are like in a absolutely chaos world. You can see like it's a war zone.
It's a war zone, like if we are going here in wartime to the border and we can actually see the fights. I want to ask you specifically about the controversy that Maman is providing in the last few days or in the last few months. You saw it up close. You saw the people and you spoke with the people that he saved. How real is that, and how, let's say, authentic is it?
As we can tell in this in journalism, I was embedded with his team on the ground for 3 days. Okay, so and I spoke with these guys, and I trust this guy. They took care of me. Okay, for all the time that I was there. So and I did speak with this girl just behind you. Okay, and others. That just saying that they have been released by his organization, by CYCA, by Steve Maman, the Jewish Schindler. So and isn't it the most important thing? I mean, to see for the Yazidi people to see their wife and children be released, don't you think?
Which is the most important thing.
Just if I can add something,
yes.
I just would like to thank and to hit my head to Efrat Lerter, which is Israeli Channel 2 reporter that was with me during this trip. She's a really fantastic woman, a really good journalist, and without her it would not have been the same. Definitely not. So
it's good to have you back home.
Thank you very much.
You're here and to see you in the newsroom again, and not in Iraq. Thank you very much for this. We're going out for a small break, an update from our news desk, and then we will be back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the news today. The flood of migrants trying to reach Europe and the continent's difficulty to come up with a strategy to deal with them has put the spotlight firmly on migration. The focus has been on the desperation these migrants are experiencing as they try to reach safety and start new lives. But there's another question. How has migration changed nations around the world? With me here in the studio to discuss this is Hillel Shenker, chair of Democrats Abroad Israel. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Evening, Lucy.
And also Brian Thomas, also known as Brian of London, as senior editor at Israeli Kol. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
So, you know, we've been talking a lot about minorities and immigration for the last few days, maybe for the last few months, and the ability of these minorities to actually integrate into societies that they're getting into. And like we experienced and like we saw in Charlie Hebdo, the first, let's say, sentence or the first thought that came is the fact that these minorities were not able to integrate good in the British society, in the French society, but maybe in the American one it's a little bit different. But again, and what my question is how is this process of a minority happening in Europe or in the United States? How do you start to integrate in a society that is so foreign to you?
Yeah, well, you know, if you look at America, America is a society of waves of immigration. Now, you look at the American identity. My great-grandparents came from the Ukraine to New York in this huge wave of 800,000 Jewish immigrants who came from Eastern Europe. And they were a wave after the Irish and after the Italian and after the German Jews, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I would just put a focus just for a second. We're seeing right now live footage coming from Hungary, Budapest, Hungary, from all the migrants that are there. These are, you know, incredible, incredible, not in a positive way, but footage and images that we're seeing.
And I'm thinking of the Statue of Liberty and of the famous poem by Emma Lazarus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Now that was how America absorbed, with all sorts of problems and difficulties and riots and everything else, but stage by stage people became American and entered into the huge mosaic. I think in England and London, in Europe in general, where the societies were much older, it's much more complicated.
And how open it was. Right now, if we're looking at the United States, it's not that open like it used to be before. It's pretty close and it's pretty far geographically even from the places that the people are escaping from. It's not Europe to the United States, it's the Middle East to Europe, and this is a little bit different.
I want to go with a point about culture and the differences in culture. And, you know, I watched the last election in the UK, and the UKIP, UK Independence Party, stood on an anti-immigration platform. And, you know, to me that sounds like a mistake. Immigration can be hugely positive, and we're in Israel, which a few years ago, not very long ago, in the space of 10 years, took 1 million Russians into a population of 5.5 million. And that was assimilated immigration. They came into a strong culture that they wanted to come to, and we assimilated. I mean, there are problems at the edges, but nothing like the scale of the problems that Europe is now facing with the kind of migrants they're taking. And it's about having a strong culture in the country into which these people are going, and at least a match in who's going there, and a desire to assimilate. And what we have all across Europe is people who don't want to assimilate, who show no signs of wanting to assimilate, and worse, it's not like the sort of Jewish immigrations that went to America or across Europe. They got there, and they didn't want to change. The worst that could be said is some of them wanted to live in a little enclave, but they never imposed their views on those outside them.
I want to, in this specific note, to go to our correspondent in London, Jonathan Sashadoti. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening, Lucy.
You know, if we are talking about integration and if we are talking about this specific subject, today in The Independence there was this big article, exclusive article, about talking about ultra-Orthodox community in London that actually teaching its 3-year-old students that everyone who is not Jewish, he is Nazi. So how is this working with a very good integrated Jewish population in Britain?
The article in The Independent today focuses on something very disturbing about this one particular school or preschool teaching Satmar Hasidim in a very high population Jewish area of London. However, it must be said that this is very much the exception, not the rule, among the Jewish community, but that makes it no less bad to hear that these children as young as 3 were being taught about the Holocaust at all at such an early age, and then being taught about it in terms of simply all non-Jews pursuing the death of all Jews. Now, we have to deal with that sort of issue quite separately from the idea of mainstream unassimilated immigration that Brian was talking about there just a moment ago. In general, the Jewish population of the UK has assimilated very well over the years. Readmitted around 300 years ago by Oliver Cromwell, Jews then became a fundamental part of many segments of British life, whether it was business or banking, down to sports, culture, science, medicine, you name it. Jews fully integrated and even led, in some respects, certain parts of British life, and did integrate very squarely into British society. Now, fringe parts of the Jewish community still exist, like any other group. The question that has been coming up more and more often as parties like UKIP seem to be talking more about immigration and chiming a chord with people in the UK is whether other forms of immigration, especially more recently during the New Labour years in particular, with the multiculturalism project, which said that different ethnic groups and different foreign groups could emigrate to Britain and not assimilate, make up their own sub-communities of British society, and whether or not that has worked within Great Britain. And that's a question that still remains to be answered.
Yes, Jonathan Sashadoti, thank you very, very much for this. Let's try to answer this. Hillel, you know, I'm trying to look at the, for example, the United States. How come Muslim community and the Arab community and Jewish community were able to integrate in the United States in a good way, but not in Europe?
Well, I think one of the differences is that in Europe you have very set cultures, if you take France, for example, a very rigid culture of separation of church and state, and we don't allow any pluralistic religious expression in public spaces. America is much more multicultural in its very nature. And so therefore, people feel less threatened, but there is also this strong core of American identity that if you want to succeed, you have to become more American. And American society is more, I think, open to this, even though we do see in the latest election campaign, we see Donald Trump making very harsh comments against the Mexicans and the Hispanics. And he has to understand that they are becoming the largest minority in the country.
And in Europe, that passed so much in World War II, that is supposed to be open to immigrants, that is supposed to be open to multicultural and not to go back to history, we are seeing today that in one way or another, history is knocking on the door of Europe again.
The history on the door. Europe has this strong history, and the different countries had amazingly diverse cultures. And then somebody came up with the idea of an EU project to try and bring them all together. And I mean, I would say it's a failure. I would say economically it's very ropey right now. And this idea that Jonathan mentioned it, this multiculturalism means something very specific to the UK and to Europe. And it really was this elevation of every culture to a similar level. So an indigenous culture that Britain once had, that, you know, this was the nation of Churchill. Churchill is almost unquotable in Britain because he has views expressed 100 years ago that if you express them today, the police will come knocking on your door and say you are a hate speech. You're inciting hate speech. Yes. That's the Britain. And how does that culture, how is that going to integrate people who have a much better idea of who they are than the British do today?
Gentlemen, unfortunately, this problem is not going to disappear anywhere, but definitely we're going to speak about this much and much more. But for now, thank you very, very much for coming to the studio, and thank you very much for having this conversation with me. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
An Israeli company has come up with a way of fighting pests which damage agriculture, and it's doing so using all things nuclear energy. Yes, nuclear energy. I-24 News correspondent Benjamin Lassouf traveled to the Jordan Valley to see the system up close and has this report.
Nuclear energy still has a lot of exploitable applications. In the Jordan Valley, only a few kilometers from the Jordanian border, the BioBee company has been using it to help with agriculture. The technique developed aims to fight several parasites, like the Mediterranean fly. This rather common parasite is widespread over the Mediterranean, where it spoils vegetables and fruits.
This technology is supported by the IAEA because we are using some radioactive source. It's not dangerous. It's very safe, and we are having a lot of controlling to see that there is no something that happened that it's not okay.
At one stage of the production, the females are eliminated and the male larvae are sterilized. Once they reach sexual maturity, they are sent en masse to the invaded areas. The sterilized males then fertilize the females' eggs, sterile eggs that won't evolve into new flies. This way, the problem disappears in the next generation.
It's a way of doing agriculture and to reduce the use of chemicals for the health of the fruits.
It's a technique at the service of natural agriculture that already has proven its importance both in Israel and abroad. The company has already sent 380 billion flies to Croatia to help fight the Mediterranean pandemic. The result was spectacular. By using these insects, BioBee has chosen to use a radically ecological method that offers an alternative to the quasi-generalized use of pesticides in the agricultural industry, which represents a $40 billion market worldwide.
And no, not the face for Jonathan Regev. No, the face for the.
Yes. You think I'm an insect. That's what you think.
No. But this is Bill.
Bah. This is Bill. Yeah.
Okay, let's NFL.
Yes, NFL, the season starts next Thursday. We do not know a week ahead if the biggest star in the NFL, probably Tom Brady, the quarterback for the New England Patriots, if he will be playing in the beginning of the season. The new season is about to start, but we're still talking about what happened at the end of last season. We spoke about this, a Deflategate case, it's called, when some of the balls were deflated by the Patriots, who eventually won the Super Bowl. And Tom Brady, who was the quarterback, did he know, did he not know about it? The NFL suspended him for 4 matches out of 16 matches altogether in the season. There we see NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. He's the one who took the decision. Tom Brady and his team, they appealed to the court. A week before the opening match, we do not know if Tom Brady is going to play. Okay. What's Gisele's wife thinking about it? I wonder.
I think that she's enjoying her time in wherever.
Stay at home, don't. Yes. FIFA, what's the general notion about FIFA, you ask? Maybe this will give you the answer. What? There's a new display about FIFA, it's a FIFA display, in the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, the Museum of Mafia. It's called the Museum of Organized Crime. That's what it's called. God. And there's a display by FIFA, a FIFA display. No one is saying, there it's it, the beautiful game turns ugly. No one is saying FIFA is a mafia, but there is a display about FIFA in the Mafia Museum.
It doesn't mean it's like they are putting things you're just trying to explain a very complicated thing.
Exactly, maybe
Why you are hinting about some things that
What do you mean when you put this and you don't say they are a mafia? But yeah, we know that there has been a lot of corruption around. Allegedly, of course. Allegedly.
Everything is allegedly.
We have to say, I have no proof. I have to say that also.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Therefore, but I can say there is a display about FIFA in the Museum of Organized Crime.
Okay, so let's talk about British people.
Yes, I love them. Every time they invent something more ridiculous, even more ridiculous than the gravy championship we had yesterday. What do we bring today? A football match with a twist because it's played in a river.
What?
There we see it.
How do you play football in water?
I have not tried it yet. I did play when it was raining, but I've never played in a river. And and it's a tradition. It's a tradition that dates back to around 200 years ago.
It's tradition?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Or as the Brits would say, really?
Really?
Yes. Yes.
It's like, it's just
play in the water. Yes, because it's fun, and if we don't wrestle with gravy, we'll play with water.
I play very good football in the water.
I know.
Very good.
I know. We will bring a river tomorrow, and we will challenge you.
Jonathan Regev, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
Me and Jonathan are going to play football in the river somewhere in Israel. In the meantime, have a great night from the Jaffa Port.